Look, I get it. Being a politician is a nearly impossible job. It's also really frustrating. I think a lot in terms of also for of compassion for some of these politicians. If you look at them, like when they enter office, and if they've been in for 10 years, they look like ghosts. They look like somebody's just sucked the life out of them. And it's not just because they're being victimized by others, but that's certainly part of it. But they're just put in very, very toxic environments. And how about this? It's frustrating too. Like you want this and this and this to happen, and it all turns to crap because of all these different variables that you move that are out of your control. Like the personalities in the landscape of politics at this point in time, what person can determine that? What one person? Well, no one person. And then especially you add the last 100+ years of just total disaster, social, political, economic disaster, and then just the toxicity and the strength of certain groups that via certain gigantic historical tragedies jettison themselves into highly influential positions from which they created all this toxicity and all this division and all this pre-programmatic poverty. So in a lot of cases, yeah, I get it. They're on a sinking ship and they've got like a little teaspoon and they're flicking out the water with it. And even me, I'm somewhat involved. I mean, being alive at this point, and at this point in history, with all these sinking ships, with all of this rot, especially in the West, all of these mass targeted cultural attacks, unprecedented. And I get it, they're still sort of shilly shallying around, the politicians, they're trying to make everybody happy. But my prognosis as an engineer is that the architecture's messed up. So if you want to come back to the ship analogy, stuff is broken, like there's a rip in the hull, and the whole thing needs to go into dry dock. And maybe we just come up with a new design and go with that. We downsize the principles back to the core of equitable governmental system. So I'm on an architectural plane. I am not in the politics game. I'm not into selling this idea. Like, yeah, this is a really good idea. You should really get behind it. Look, I understand that ships blow up with or without architects on them. So, as far as I'm concerned, I am resigned to my fate. I don't expect to live another day. So, whether or not my architectural plans are adopted, um, who knows? But I'm certainly not going to be the person that's walking hat in hand to a bunch of chumps trying to fix an unfixable situation. Like, well, why don't you go down back into the boiler room, my good man, and why don't you just stoke the steamers as we've done for hundreds of years, and tut tut and all of that. I'm not. That's not what I'm doing on my final days. I don't recognize that type of the authority. So, but as far as implementing plans, I realize that there's sometimes some compromises not need to be made, but in the case we're dealing with now, it's not even time to start thinking in terms of compromises. It's really time to be thinking in terms of new design based on new technology. Would you think, oh, well, we fought a war, so you know what was quite useful? Battleships. So why don't we get some battleships? No, the whole technology has changed in that field. So your whole opinions about it don't matter if you're still on that wavelength. So, but coming back to what is important, having systems that that deliver what they're supposed to, and what they're not supposed to deliver is politicized political systems, and that's sort of the dog chasing its tail type of historical moment that we're in here, in at this point in time. We have an incongruence between financial and politics and representational government. We've got deliberate cultural incongruencies that have been politicized, and you've got different backers on sides of both sides of the equation. So you want to have that's where compromises, when you're in sort of a situation like that, compromises is not the right answer. So for the people to go in for that career and buddy up with people that are just trying to shake the tree and see if something falls off, that's a different clientele entirely. Also, the whole sick media and information landscape that's looking for gossip and stupid chicken-headed topics and getting into everyone's business and celebrities, and just a complete and utter waste of time. It's like going into a smoky room and just breathing in that air all day and feeling like you've been a part of something. Stay outside. There's no point in engaging on that level. And yet, is it normal? Is it vulgar? Are we talking about vulgarity? Are we talking about vulgaris? Are we talking about commonality? Well, oh yes, we are. That's the norm. The norm isn't satisfactory. So what is supernormal? Supernormal is not engaging in that. You don't need to be publicly recognized. That's like the one thing that the billionaires figured out. The best thing is not being public, like a public toilet. And yet they're the ones that should be public, because at some point they inherited a responsibility that they shirk. But see, again, this incongruency within themselves is a sign of an incongruent system. The most wealthy should be the most invested, have the most to invest in good things. Problem is, the people that got this wealth the bad way turned out to be the bad people, the wrong people, and they produce bad results. So simplifying these things makes them a lot easier to deal with. They're not as beguiling as they might appear. So I wouldn't even say I'm addressing the political class. I mean, of course, there's probably couple of people trapped in that rat race that have some understanding of what I'm talking about, but they're not advanced enough to really understand what the next generation of architecture needs to look like. And so it's, again, we're going into crisis. We need to have all these things. Yesterday we don't have them. The crisis just continues. And then it's a question, okay, when the ship finally sinks, what floats is left over? How does that look? Can that be predictable? Is that avoidable? Can you have two concurrent parallel programs going at once? So that when you pull the plug on the old one, you can just turn on the new one without there being a gap in between them? Can you do something like that instead? Well, it depends on who you're dealing with. And see, this brings me back. So, everybody's ganging up on Russia now because it's so obvious how crazy and sadistically wrong their system of governance has become. But if you look into the oligarchs that were surrounding Putin, one big name plops out. The guy used to walk around like he had a broomstick up his butt and had his bodyguard like a big buff dude, always 2 steps behind him. Berezovsky. He's the dude that got into the Ukraine independence game after he got pushed out of Russian politics. So, is there an oligarch game going on in Ukraine? Yeah, of course. Also, all throughout Eastern Europe, especially the Balkans, where you got the Ottomans working overtime. So, that whole, privatization is what they call that. Private, it's out there in the open. They made public things private for private individuals. And these individuals have mismanaged their mandate. But they're above the law because they have political influence. That's essentially the oligarch class. Now, the good news is they're identifiable. The bad news is they're resistant to change. So you can even see during a war how they handle themselves. They keep their heads down. They're laying low. Which brings me back to the naval blockade. What a fascinating concept. Naval blockade of the Black Sea. These grain ships that are trying to get out. Well, it turns out that there's gigantic agribusinesses owned by oligarchs that took all of the land that was cleared during the Holodomor, where they murdered the peasantry by the millions. That's owned by global players, not just Ukrainian oligarchs, but the grain they were trying to get through the Russian blockade was being shipped to the CCP and Saudi Arabia of all things. Oh yeah, Iran. Let's not forget Iran. Iran's been playing a huge role. Los Angeles, Iranians. There's a vector nobody saw coming. So, but Saudis. So the cleared off patch of land, the Berlusconi and his crew and people like that's owned now legally. They bought it for pennies on the dollar, like not even pennies on the dollar. But of course they have money because we're talking about malign capital. They couldn't get their grain to their hungry populations. But because they couldn't do that, then they decided, well, we want to at least get some return on our money. So why don't we ship it to Poland instead and crash the price of grain? And the Polish blocked them. And that's been an issue. So on the face of it, Ukrainian grain being blocked from being sent to poor countries that are also producing massive amounts of human torpedoes. But no, it was heading to China, and then the Russians blocked it. And the Saudis. So they might have to go without because the Ukrainian economic, political, socio-political economic system got blocked by the Russians. So now, if you're a well-made person, like right now, you're vomiting. Like just this, the reality of that is nauseating. I understand that. It's true. But now that we know that, now that this problem has brought these things to light, again, I talked about nationalizing things. That's a holdings right there that could be nationalized. Now, when I say nationalized, that means the profits, future profits, go into a national wealth fund, not into international pockets that are also, strangely enough, adversaries, geopolitical adversaries, pockets. So, and then how about this? Instead of intensive agriculture, which is what they were doing because they don't give a damn about Ukraine or its people or its culture or its economy, instead of that, the whole land can be also divided up and repopulated according to cultural objectives, such as remedying one of the worst occurrences of modern history. And not doing it with words and gestures and spins and co-options, but for real. How about engaging in things like a project for permaculture or ecological housing development for villages? Things like that. More low scale, low tech, organic farming, not the big tech, high overproduction type of farming. How about quality instead of quantity type of farming? So that is a huge project. It could be more. It could be funded from the proceeds of any profits on the ownership level, and it's then again managed by culturally sensitive, culturally advanced management, and not slave drivers, anonymous criminal slave drivers. So I know it can happen. So, and I have a feeling that it will happen, at least there. But good projects like that could happen anywhere. I think of the U.S. immediately. The U.S. nationalizes all the crap that's been turned toxic and puts that into a wealth fund, and then that wealth fund is applied to long-term sustainable, culturally important and significant activities and works. It can be a gigantic success. It can be super turbocharged. It can turn all of the blight of the last 100 years around ASAP. You get all the wheels turning at once. There's no lack of capital. The only lack there is a high quality citizenry, and everything in the world should be done that all the things that are needed for that to happen are put in place, and all the things preventing that from happening are removed. Finally, that is the test of good governance. Now, returning to the politics of the United Kingdom, my proposal is for a King's holiday, which is to say, both the House of Commons and the House of Lords be put on holiday for 100 days, and during those 100 days, there will be a national competition for MPs and Lords. And on the basis of that competition, which is decided by a new way of voting that is not tampered with by the usual subjects, that I'm sure the quality will be infinitely better. And finally, it will be at the discretion of the king himself to appoint the MPs and lords. And at what time the bank is transferred to the Treasury. So the Treasury Department takes over the finances. And that's the shock therapy. The extent of the shock therapy that the United Kingdom requires for it to have the basic architecture to get through this era of exterminationism. It does that, and it can do that. You can survive and flourish. If it fails to do that, it could take years until something like that happens, and then finally it will happen. A quick take on Lampedusa. Lampedusa is a small island off the coast of Sicily. It belongs to Italy. And it's also been attacked multiple times throughout its history by who? Oh, it must be the Ottomans again. See, we're going back to the 15th century because Europeans are such space cadets, they've completely forgotten the history of the region or the politics, the people involved, the hatefulness. Because they showed up one day, there was like 1,000 people living there, and they hauled them all off as slaves, never to be seen again, uninhabited island. Common in those parts, but space cadet Europeans that are watching some type of idiot rom-coms and things like that, they don't know that. They don't know much about anything. But in any case, so there was a scandal because a battalion and 2 brigades of irregular forces engaged in an amphibious naval operation. And all of a sudden you had 7,000 plus irregulars beach their boats on the shores and start scattering. The inhabitants on the island are 7,000, so you had a force of, maybe 9,000 versus 7,000 civilians. Who knows how many military personnel, but certainly not enough. No Navy to speak of. Like, oh, we have radar, we have satellite. But a battalion plus 2 brigades can make it into Italy, no problemo. So all that budgetary allotments, all those people with the uniforms on, the shiny buttons and the big hats, they were sleeping when that happened. And so it's funny, like, how do these things develop? Maybe somebody on the beach is like, hello? Ciao. We got a problem here, Houston. So this is also something to think, like, for preppers and stuff, a brigade plus battalion, a brigade is 5,000 troops. Plus 2 battalions, 1,000 each, 7,000. So you have an amphibious landing force of 7,000 people. What would be needed if you're a military person? Like, what would be needed to turn that assault around? Now, of course, if you get into naval operations, yeah, they should have never even have been able to make it to the beach. But certainly the beaches have not been adequately fortified. And then once they hit the beaches, what do? How much artillery do you need for 7,000 irregulars? But oh, no, this wasn't an act of war. The humanitarians, they need to have the Red Cross was pre-positioned to hand out lip balm and who knows what they give them there, little plastic bags filled with fruits, and make sure that they aren't thirsty. And then somehow they were disappeared. They were then shuttled off in the middle of the night to Sicily proper, where there's, I guess, larger networks of human traffickers that have better political cover, that it doesn't alarm the population as much. Maybe some hollowed out urban areas where drugs are very prolific and police don't do much and haven't been doing much for decades, like some place like that, some type of like wasteland, industrial, maybe Calabria or something like that. Who knows? Like the information space, they didn't cover that part because that's too complicated for their viewership. But they had phony baloney, Maloney show up. And von der Leyen. They're like about, I don't know, 4'9" high, little Mandarin midgets with hairdos show up. We're taking this very seriously. We got to talk about this. And they kept using the term migrants instead of irregulars. So they had very chosen vocabulary. And, of course, showing what are you going to do about this? Oh, we're going to take care of this. So this is a good lesson. If these are the leaders that your system produces, your system is broken. So they're not only ridiculous, like on the face of it, they look ridiculous, they act ridiculous, they do nothing except bob and weave. Let's also not forget, phony baloney Maloney ran as some type of on the right, she some type of Toryist optics. So there were much more radical and debased and retrograde Leninist parties that she defeated on a presumably conservative platform, or dare I say nationalistic platform, which is that maybe Italy, somebody would do something for Italy for a change instead of saving the world. That caused, like amongst the Mandarin European classes, that caused agita that she won the election. Because the fear, oh my goodness, we got a Mandarin midget at 4'9" to talk. Now, to her credit, she worked as a bartender in some type of bongo party bar in who knows where, I guess in Rome somewhere. But maybe she has like at least that half of working class experience behind her, if you want to call it that. But just shuttling a battalion and 2 brigades, reshuffling them somewhere, that's not solving any type of problems in a meaningful way. So your political systems that produce these weeders, let's not call them leaders, weeders, is broken. So who financed them? Who's covering them from the standpoint of some type of also failed information space? The reporters, the analysts, the think tanks surrounding them. Oh, and the humanitarians surrounding them, the useful idiots surrounding them. the NGOs surrounding them, they're all failed. They're all part of the problem. So when will the next Brigade Plus show up and where? Nobody knows, but navies, that's something too complicated for mandarins to figure out. They don't know what that means. Like certainly all those ships and all that equipment and everything else that they misappropriated taxes for, that they don't work when the leadership doesn't work, because they're all waiting for orders, right? It's like a construction crew that doesn't have to work. They're not complaining. They're doing their little pleasure cruises while battalion level forces are just getting shipped in all at once. It was funny. They were like towed together, like tied together, so they all came in. It looked military. It was a military operation, just not the counter military operation. That's what was missing. But then they say, oh, you know what? There wasn't a political will to do something. Well, why is that? Like that should be the first question you ask yourself. Like, how is that happening? And then how do you get rid of that not happening? So who are these wonks that have an agenda that isn't in the interest of, quite specifically, the national interest of Italy? I mean, for the people of Italy, this is a disgrace. It's a disaster and a disgrace and a crime. And so it will be documented as such, and all the people involved and how they operated and what they said. All of that should be documented, because it might not, this thing might not be turned around this year or even next year. But if you're assuming that in 10 years that this stuff is not going to be looked back upon as the gigantic crimes, you're wrong. So right now they're singing their own praises, but that's not going to continue on forever. And if you think like, oh, we're just all going to disappear and, Italy's going to be wiped off the face of the map or unrecognizable, you're wrong too. It's not going to work out that way. They're going to push it like bacteria, like gangrene, to whatever regions they can get to places of opportunity. But when that penicillin kicks in, they're going to start, there's going to be some major reversals. And that day is coming. But until that day comes, it's fun to watch. I wouldn't say fun, but you could just see how all the different pieces are playing their parts. And it is comprehensive. It's combined arms in the civilian sphere. And again, people say, "Oh well, humanitarianism." Guess what? We got a war going on in Eastern Europe. That humanitarian aid that these invaders are burning up, the personnel that they're burning up, the security that they're burning up, that could be applied to that theater, the space that they take up. How is that not interrelated to the greater war effort against the West? How is that not? Now somebody will stand up. No, that's not true. Somebody whose head's been polished like a chrome torpedo is going to get up. He's going to grab the mic. He's going to be angry. Or she. How can you leave these people? This and that and this and that. That's information operations. Those people are agitators, professional agitators and explainers, and they're there for a reason, and somebody put them there. And the messed up thing is they get paid to do that. So they'll be at the beach, months, have generous expense account, but that one day they need to show up, or 2 or 3, to cover a crisis, they'll be there. Oh yeah. They'll make sure not to get drunk the day before or high on whatever it is they're snorting, make sure they look the part, and they'll get up there and they'll say what they need to say. And then as soon as the thing blows over, it's back to La Dolce Vita. And then again, they die of a heart attack at some stripper joint. Though there's 10 other goons that are just jumping to take that job. It beats throwing crates around all day for minimum wage. So we don't live in a moral time. And when you don't live in a moral time and bad things start happening, things can get worse. But again, let's just document. We're in the documentation phase of this operation because it has been ongoing for years now. When do you want to call? When did they start it in earnest? Is it 2017? 2014? Something like that. So we're now 10 years into this operation. So it's getting old, it's fading. It's late stage cancer. But taking in the comprehensiveness of it now and again is sometimes breathtaking. How much effort they're putting into these types of things, especially the explaining side of it. Which again brings me back to the humanities. They targeted the humanities and destroyed it, and only cultivated ideological, bulletproof, bomb-proof dunderheads. Because only by doing that could they create this type of information space that's so compromised. They don't even have any critics, like somebody who will write a comment. They just have somebody that deletes the comments that aren't on point, aren't applauding them on. They just have people that delete those. Maybe they'll select out a few of the crazy comments by astroturfers, and then they'll astroturf that. Make sure they retweet the fake narrative. And seem like they're on the morally superior side. Again, people playing on playing on your heartstrings, and women are straight up and down suckers for this con. Anybody pointing to the past and saying they were victims about something, and then because they were victims, or that was victimizing, or this was bad, that now they need to accept being invaded. No, those are agitators. That's what they are. And so you could have a group, you could have a legitimate grievance, but the way they're using it, the manipulative, spun out, ass backwards way that they're spinning it, is really making a mockery of the historical event. It's turning it on its head. It's where there might have been goodwill, now there's reasons for ill will, because these people have spun it in such a way that makes no contemporary sense. So they again have a benefit, but are they really benefiting historical memory by misusing tragedies from the past? Yes or no? Of course not. Absolutely not. But people that don't have morals, that will do anything for money, this is where you get to see the the lowest of the low in operation, mixed with useful idiots that are really tragic. These are people that wanted to do the right thing, were told this is the right thing. It's the absolute wrong thing. But there they are, ready to kick the bucket. They've been working their whole life, sacrificing, doing all these things in this false belief, just because they were built to listen to some type of top. They were supposed to be the hands and feet and legs of morality. They got the wrong programming. So there they are, working away for Satan, because Satan told them he was God. He had the right morality. Help the invaders. That's what you need to do. Oh, here I am. Let me chop up this food for people, and they had camera teams following them around. Sad, really, really sad and misguided. But in prisoner of war camps and stuff, these are the type of sadistic games people would play. They'd have them stripped naked and have to sing a national anthem until they passed out from the cold or something like that. This is sort of an equivalent of that in the realm of social games, social gaming. Sad to see the victims of sadism. But there's a certain amount of masochism involved in the sadomasochistic relationships they have, so it is what it is, right? It's like watching a lion walk back and forth in front of its cage at the zoo. You could see it as tragic. You could just see it as this is what it is. This is how things can shake out. This is karma in a certain sense. But Lampedusa, it's not going to go away. They airbrushed it away this week real quick because there was like slight mention, like somebody might have, maybe some commentator said that this was an act of war. And at that point, the Mandarins had to react, but they played it down real quick this time. When will the next time be? Where will it even be reported? Maybe somebody caught it on their phone. That's why. Then the act of war comment was made. Then, whatever the Mandarins were doing, they had to drop it and fly in. Their 4'9" selves, suited and booted, to say they had the situation under control. Oh, and miraculously, again, all of them disappeared somewhere. They were removed from the island and placed somewhere else. Nobody knows what happened. But of course, they're so trustworthy at this point. I'm sure that the right decision was made on some level. I'm sure that didn't happen. So we'll see how going forward. Is Phony Baloney Maloney the Toryist of Italy? Is that the way they're going to play this out until she gets booted out and replaced, maybe because of some type of economic failure, and then she's replaced with some radicalized loser or some organized crime affiliated crooner? We shall see. Will Italy end up becoming a part of a wider war zone in the decades to come? Time will tell. It's not like there hasn't been war before in Europe or in Italy. It's not like that's a new concept. You go back to Italy, you had a whole bunch of different people, different factions to fighting amongst themselves. It hasn't changed. So you'll have, who cares? All right, yeah, let's bring in this foreign army and I'll just make sure I escort it into my rivals' territories and job done. Maybe I'll even get a kickback for it. Doesn't bother me, no skin off my nose. Those type of people were all over Italy for centuries. So have they gone away? Probably not. It's just a modern iteration of that. But with the documentation, this is the thing. That type of stuff, it's hard to disappear it, especially not for people that might go through that place with a fine-tooth comb at some point, which might be inevitable because of the gigantic breakdown in security, which will have a catastrophic chain reaction for villainous factions. So there was a report about Moldova, especially what's happened there since the fall of communism, as they say. And I think it should be used by scientists, Western scientists, as a perfect example of what bad governance looks like, and the actors involved, and the mechanisms involved, and the ploys involved, the people involved, the psychology of the people involved, the money involved, the geopolitical aspects involved, the history involved, the people involved. Because there's no good reason in the world why Moldova shouldn't be a gemstone in a brilliant and prosperous Europe that is free of these forces of decay and despotism. So one of them, of course, a billionaire was involved. So it's billionaires using criminal methods to become rich. So they're already lawbreakers. They become extremely wealthy, and then they leverage that wealth into either forming their own political parties or creating media companies or doing a bunch of other things. But in other words, they end up with a substitutionist political system. So the institution is there, they just roll in with bribes or whatever other means. If someone's blocking them, I'm sure they use something else. But in places where inflation has just wiped out everybody's savings, and it's something that's done over a period of years, so people have no hope at all, no other options, that they come in them with money when everyone's broke. And people cut a deal, surprisingly enough. You have the choice to cut a deal or live on less than $2 a day. If you think I'm exaggerating about the poverty in Moldova over decades, the last couple of decades, people are selling their kidneys there. In probably one of the choicest spots in all of Europe. Some of the best people in the world can be found there. Right on the Black Sea, lovely, enchanting, magnificent. Selling their organs because of the economy that the billionaire runs with his people in public office that aren't big on ideas. They're just sort of collecting a paycheck. Oh, and leveraging their political positions to make even more money. Why? Because they're greedy, and greed is a defilement. Some of these people are possessed by demons of greed. That's right, you heard it. Demons. Greedy demons. Have you ever heard that term? Some people, there's some folk tales about greedy demons. These are all true. You should look them up. People that get a greedy demon in them and have no skill and no self-reflection. Well, you can see it. The oligarch's name escapes me. It's also hard to pronounce. But it wasn't the billionaire bank robber oligarch. That's someone else. The Shore guy, that's something else you need to vectorize. Where are the influences coming from there? And how is that type of influence also in other places? And is that a clan or a different clan than the other clan? Well, it's funny, the billionaire, the other Moldovan billionaire that didn't rob the bank, that has presumably left the country, he had a 95% disapproval rating. Think about that. He had enough money, more money than mine, as everybody hated his guts. How about that? How does that happen? Like there are kings that didn't even have a half of his wealth. And yet he managed to make himself as despised as he did. And he did have a method, and it was systematic. And it is verifiable. It's historical. So political substitutionism is what these oligarchs create. So communism was something else. This is something new. And they did it through the privatization. So all of that needs to be reverse engineered. That means we found out what they did and who was behind it. And now it's just going to be redone based on a new understanding of new criminal methods. And so, no, there's not going to be any transference of that wealth into the future. No, those were criminal acts conducted by criminals, and there's going to be a redistribution. And it's going to be done not just on privatization type of metrics. It's going to be done on the basis of cultural resiliency, not who has money and no questions asked. That's asinine. You have to think of the type of people that benefit from that type of system. Well, in Moldova, there you see it. What you see is what you get. Some of the worst of the worst of the worst in the best of the best of the best. So yeah, the punishment should fit the crime. And the crime is gigantic. It eclipses even what was done in Ukraine. And yet Ukraine is in a similar boat. And here's the thing, the story came up like during the war, whether or not it was a good thing to be getting rid of oligarchs like that, billionaires like that, because there has been some shells that have been rotating, because again, the public fallout of revelations like this are probably pretty big in wartime situations. Peacetime, they flub these things off. But in wartime, they got to at least make an appearance of doing something. But certainly there's an immense amount of parallels between the Moldovan and Ukrainian situations. Extremely similar, just almost identical. Including the malign Russian influence in both pies. And of course, their henchmen that are usually connected with them in some way. Certainly via business connections. Because that's the thing, how do these business billionaires become such geniuses? Well, they leverage the governmental contracts. See, that's the thing. So usually, the money comes from illicit sources. Everybody's broke. They come in, they do the political substitutionism, and then they leverage their political power for perpetual, not just their land holdings and industry holdings, because that's also a political thing. If you have the politics, you have that. If you don't have the politics, you don't have that. No chance of getting in on that. So, and they like to let international investors know that there's no way to get beyond them because they're the political establishment. So, and they don't like to give that out to other people. They like to keep it all sort of in the dark. Less people talking about what they have, less they got to worry about things. And they consider it theirs. They stole it, right? They proved themselves to be the strong thief, the brave bandit that came out of the dark and said, guess what, everybody? I'm throwing this game and it's going to be public this time. And oh, these are my TV stations. This is my new little presenter here that she dresses up in little business suits, wiggles in front of a camera. And I got like 5 or 10 of those in circulation, going 3 networks at once. Doing real important journalism, like showing a new duck house that was built on a little lake near one of the private chateaus or private jacuzzis that the billionaire built. Thinks that's an important story to run with. But things like the inflation rate, or what's happening in industry, or how many people are employed again, have the roads been paved, what does the city's squares look like here with, oh my goodness, there's trash, just there's a big hole here, there's a burnt out building. What? No, just too busy for all that. They can't fix the world. They can just about fix their finances and fix it permanently by throwing the game for everyone else, and that's it. They're punked out at the end of the day. They don't got no steam left for other people solving problems as a politician. What? Didn't you know that's not the culture? That's not the future, according to them? So I mentioned as in a previous expose that this is happening in other places. So, but the thing is if you can put these lenses on and see it happening in your country, you can put 2 and 2 together on the people, the socialites, in air quotes, that are affiliated with them, their employees, no matter how surfed up they are in surfism, family members, you name it. It's not rocket science. It really isn't. Who's in the prosecutor's office? Who's chief of police? And on down the line. So for them, just flipping the law in their favor, it's just business. That's it. So it's to give themselves the facade of legality. That's it. They don't believe in managing things well. Managing things well means managing it well for their pockets. So, but in any case, this has sort of a funny, comical, nice end. Nobody knows where this dude is. He's not in jail, but apparently he's not in the country. But the country's still messed up. It's not like just getting rid of one of them gets rid of the gander of them. And so you got to go through Parliament. That's the wonderful thing. See, in a situation like what I just described, to profile each and every one of the people in Parliament. Now, I'm not saying all of them are straight out of hell, but I'm sure you're going to find some interesting material to put into the annuals of scientific research that can be useful for other people that need to spot how bad actors tend to be, what motivates them, what stories they tell themselves, what bad habits do they have, other than a big belief in themselves and dreaming big, nightmaring big. Did someone say malignant narcissism? That could be one thing, although that's something it's bandied about, the word. You should use more words and less psychoanalytic labels that are ambiguous. Use a little bit more time to describe in detail what makes them tick, and how people can identify that, and make sure people like that don't ever get anywhere near government in your country. And If you don't, you might want to assume that they're already there. It's just you haven't connected the dots yet.